Welcome back to Steel and Vance. We're going to talk about protests. Not one protest in particular, Linda, but certainly protests on the rise over the last number of years and have become more
expensive.
Yes, and also more interactive or defiant or, blocking roadways and standing in the way of people who perhaps need to get to the hospital or have some sort of emergency. We see it here, eco-protests, all the way to the protests that you were seeing right off the top here. The cost associated with this, the policing associated with this.
Well, I was astonished when I saw the numbers. There was something like 750 protests last year, and the police, you need to bring people in on overtime,
right,
to police these things on special duty. So it is costing, there's a resource issue for the VPD. You also worry about officer safety because things are starting to get pretty, edgy.
Everybody's stressed out. Everybody feels like everything feels so much more tense. So how are protests handled? We welcome Chief Adam Palmer from the Vancouver Police Department in studio with us.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Here.
Thank you. Pleasure.
How much has it changed?
Well, the patterns in protests have changed a lot in the last few years. So just to give you sort of an order of magnitude, normally in Vancouver, we would have about 500 protests a year. That would be just an average year in Vancouver, going back many decades. Come along 2020, 2021, 2022, we bumped up to about 800 protests a year during those years. There was a lot of social movement going on at that time. It was a post-George Floyd era, defund the police. It was COVID-19, lots of protests related to that, as well as the regular ones that we would see that are geopolitical, social justice, environmental, that kind of thing. Then we get into 2023, and last year, the final numbers were at 1,018 protests for last year.
What impact does that have on your budget?
It's huge. So last year, we spent $4 million managing protests in Vancouver. Very significant.
Wow.
It used to cost about $1 million a year to manage protests, but $4 million last year.
So what changes to shift that dollar figure?
Well, just the magnitude, like the number and the volume, and also many of them are politically charged. So we're talking about geopolitical protests and environmental protests would be the top two categories. When we're talking geopolitical, the ones we've seen, of course, that are high profile in the last year, the Israel-Hamas situation, Russia-Ukraine. There's been some related to Iran, some related to China. There's different issues going on around the world, but of course we're a very multicultural city. We've got people here from all over the world in the whole region. We are the epicenter for the whole region, so we are also the protest capital for British Columbia.
We saw in Toronto a couple of incidents where there's been pushing and shoving and it's gotten kind of violent.
Yeah.
And then we saw an incident where the police went and delivered Tim Hortons coffee to some of the protesters. What do you do when you send your officers out to police a protest? How do they make sure? I mean, they're put in a really difficult position. They're supposed to be apolitical, but sometimes things get really tricky.
Yeah, so protests are part art, part science. Everyone is slightly different. I will tell you that we have a really good system here in Vancouver because we deal with so many. The big three epicenters in the country are Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Other major cities for sure have hundreds of protests, but looking at the landscape, those are the three big cities where we're seeing the most protests right now in this current environment. And it is tough for officers because sometimes, they're very politically charged, emotionally charged events. People have, very hard feelings on them and are very emotional because it can impact, friends and family back home. And we understand that. Sometimes they get violent. Sometimes they get very vocal. Sometimes, the police officers there, people can turn and make them the focus of what they're mad about. But I will say that it's important to remember that in Canada and in Vancouver, we definitely respect people's right to lawful protest, and we want to facilitate that. And that's a right under Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, and we uphold that. But it's got to be peaceful and lawful.
That's the word that really jumps out for us is the lawful piece.
100%.
Because we do see those protests that cross the line. When you're assessing, when your team is assessing a protest that has just come underway, or if you look back and learn from something like the trucker protests in Ottawa, how do you assess what's happening and then plan to address what you're seeing? Is there a formula?
Yeah, so we actually have a whole section of officers, and that is their whole job, doing emergency and operational planning. So they're experts in planning big events. In addition to that 1,018 protests that I mentioned, there's an additional 1,700 events that they plan for every year in Vancouver. So celebration of light,
Right.
Halloween, New Year's Eve, parades, different events happening throughout the city. Car-free days, Greek days, whatever it is. So they're experts in planning. So it's about 2,700 events a year that we're planning for. The protests get all the sort of airtime, but it's thousands of events that we're actually looking at.
We often see, traffic disruptions on West Georgia or over on the bridge, and motorists are getting to the point, and we saw this last year, where they're taking matters into their own hands, getting out of their car, grabbing someone, dragging them. It's getting physical.
Yeah, a little vigilante.
So how do you sort of deal with the rights of the protesters with the rights of the public to be able to move freely?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So what we try to do in almost every case, well, in every case, but it doesn't work in every case, is we try and have a pre-meeting or conversation with the protest organizers. And I would say in most cases, they're open to that. They want to meet with us. They want to tell us what their goals are. They'll say, we want to meet here. Like, the usual locations you're familiar with. The Art Gallery, Jackpool Plaza, sometimes the library, sometimes U.S. Consulate, sometimes City Hall. They'd probably be the big 5 locations for protests.
Yeah.
But then sometimes they move around to different streets. And we'll say to them, what are your goals here? And they will say to us, well, we want to start at the Art Gallery. We want to march to the U.S. Consulate. We just want to be on the news tonight. If I can get a clip on the news, that kind of thing. We don't want to cause a lot of disruption. Some of them are actually really respectful and easy to deal with. There's others that want nothing to do with us and they won't tell us anything.
So what do you do with them?
Well, with our planning team, you got to remember too that like a lot of the stuff, like people rely on social media and public forums to get information out because they want critical mass. Like you want a lot of people to generally show up. If you're planning a small protest with maybe a dozen of your friends, you can do that with nobody knowing.
Right.
But if you want to protest with 1,000 people, you can't do that without using social media or different public means to get that out, postering, whatever it is. And we've got very sophisticated methods of monitoring that and watching that. So it's very few times we're caught off guard. We generally know what's happening. We know if they're friendly with police, not friendly with police. If the issue is very tense, like sometimes it's they're protesting something like an environmental issue.
Right.
So there's not a lot of controversy in the sense that there's not counter-protesters. There may be other issues though, and I'll use the current situation, the Israel-Hamas situation, where sometimes you get people that have very defined opinions on different views on what's happening in the Middle East, and it can cause tension. So we take all that into account and we resource it properly with officers based on the intelligence and put an operational plan together.
Do you have like a clock going? So you think, okay, we're going to let you, hold up the Lions Gate, but at a certain point, we're saying this is over.
Generally speaking, when we're talking about things like bridges, tunnels, access to hospitals, if it was going up towards the airport, that sort of thing, we don't let them do that. So we have had protests like that where they've tried to take over Lions Gate, Second Narrows, block the number 1.
Yeah.
We move those people out quickly because we're not going to let that happen. If somebody is at the Art Gallery and they want to walk down Georgia Street and go around the block,
Right.
we can facilitate that and make it work, because you have to remember, if you've got a large protest with 10,000 or 20,000 people, and we've got 100 or 200 cops or something out managing it, that's where it's part art, part science. Like, we don't want to initiate something and make it worse.
Right.
We want to work to, find the best solution in those circumstances. So our critical incident commanders, our public order commanders are experts in that, and that's where I say it's part art, part science.
When there are activists between police and like actual somewhat professional activists, if you
Right,
will, maybe
right.
not the people that are planning the protests,
Yeah.
but people that inject themselves into the process and are like, and that can sometimes see the clash with the public. What's the advice you'd give to somebody who's frustrated by that and finds themselves, in front of an activist and wanting to perhaps confront, thinking they're doing the right thing by helping police?
No, I see what you mean. Well, we try and do our best to stop people that maybe have opposing opinions, like getting face-to-face like that, because it will cause, you can get that crowd contagion as well, where some people will start riling up other people in the crowd. So we try to move in quickly to dissuade people and stop them from doing that. Sometimes people just get caught up in the moment and do stupid things. So I would remind people that, you don't want to get into a situation where you're going down there, you're exercising your lawful right in Canada, and you end up doing something stupid and end up getting arrested. Because, especially for young people, sometimes, you get teenagers and people in their young 20s, and realize that that can have huge implications in your life if you want to get on a plane or even go down to Bellingham and go shopping or whatever. Like, you're not going to be able to travel. It will impact you getting jobs in the future. So you don't want a criminal record.
Well, listen, good luck to you in 2024. And the chief brought Jody and I badges, so
badges.
We're now part of the VPD. Sergeant Steele and Sergeant Vance.
Well, everybody says we sound like a cop show, Steele and Vance. I mean, it is appropriate. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
Pleasure.
Hey, you know what? You got to stay tuned because we have some great prizes being given away in today's program. Our viewing party is still to come.
We do. Also still ahead. What fun. Your cell phone bill is going up again in 2024.
I was trying to keep it light.
Is it time to bust up Canada's telecom monopoly? Political commentator and author David Moscrop is going to join us straight ahead.
And it is time for our viewing party, of course. And we start with Marcus in Surrey. Hi, Marcus.
We have Margaret in Cloverdale. Thank you for watching.
Marilyn in Vancouver. You are on the viewing party and looking fabulous.
And Nicole in Victoria. Hello to you.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for playing along. And if you want to get in on the fun, viewing party at CHEKmedia.ca. We're giving away a gift card to Lao Y, compliments of the BC RFA.